So welcome. This is the We Reach Biomedical Innovation Bootcamp, and this is the first of a series of 4 panels of experts that we'll have for this bootcamp. This one covers the topic of customer discovery and competitive analysis. And we have 3 speakers here. I'll have them do introductions for themselves, but Chris Porter from Life Science Washington, and Sean Swanson from a startup called Meds for All. And we just had Valerie escape out of the view here, but she's coming back. Valerie Kurikbu from a company called Visus, that's a UW spin-out. So welcome, you guys. If you will, one by one, just introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your background.
Ladies first.
Okay. Hi. So Valérie Karikaberu. As Terry said, I work at Visus, which is a sports technology company that started out of University of Washington about 6 years ago. I don't know if you might have heard about it because it was featured in the news recently because it's not doing so well recently, but hopefully that will change. We'll see. And so what my role there, I was VP Strategic, or I am VP Strategic Initiatives. I'm involved in leading the research program aimed at demonstrating increased performance of our product, but also impact and effect of our product on the field. So collaborating with scientists to identify, so the product, just you know, the first product is a football helmet aimed at reducing impact accelerations, which is obviously very desirable in the context of very high frequency contact sports. And so part of this research program was to identify that the product had an effect in decreasing impact accelerations and as a result head injuries, although we couldn't talk about it in these terms because it's not a medical device. So research program IP, I'm leading the intellectual property program and strategy. The DoD program, one application is to use the technology we developed for football helmets in combat helmets. So I collaborated and got a contract from the Department of Defense to get to proof of concept for that and develop several prototypes and a bunch of other things because it's a startup, so I was involved in different things. And prior to that, I have a scientific background in neuroscience, and for about 10 years in between Visus and neuroscience, or 15 years, I did a lot of IP at University of Washington, IP commercialization and technology development and mentorship of startups.
Great. My name is Sean Swanson, the co-founder of Meds for All. My background is in engineering, like a lot of you out here. I finished my master's degree about 3 years ago and then took the leap and did Meds for All full time. I did the engineering innovation health class before that, and a lot of you are from that class, which is great to see. Meds for All is making an affordable and replaceable epinephrine autoinjector. Current autoinjectors are made with the drug inside the device. This means that when they expire, you have to replace the entire $600 device instead of just the 50 cents of drug. So our device, we simply just put an ampule inside. So I mean that's just a class 2 device. So when this expires, we can simply replace the drug and keep the same device. That means instead of replacing a $600 device, we simply just replace the 50-cent ampule, and we're good to go for another year. Lower manufacturing costs because less stringent manufacturing guidelines by the FDA. So all this has given us like an affordable and replaceable autoinjector platform technology. Epinephrine, naloxone, medical countermeasures, a lot of different drugs can work with this platform. Since then, we've won a lot of competitions, been applying to a lot of grants, a lot of similar stuff that you all will be working on this year. So excited to help you all out with that.
I'm Chris Porter. I'm presently with Life Science Washington, helping with their mentoring program and also their commercialization consultant. What I do, or what we do, is help early stage companies try and get through the valley of death, and primarily through consulting, and then we have a mentor program which has 50 high quality mentors as part of the program. My background is I'm a PhD chemical engineer who did work in biomaterials. I've worked for large companies, J&J, Pfizer, 3M, and then came out to the Pacific Northwest in 1990 to start a company and took it public in 92. Since that time, I started an incubator and incubated 8 companies out of that, of which some were successful and some weren't. It's primarily in the medical device area and also some biotechnology.
Thank you. So I'm Terry Butler, and I've worked in UW for the last 10 years. Excuse me, off and on. I was an entrepreneur in residence some years ago and helped a few companies on their commercialization plans and spun out with one of those companies in the material science space. I'm also a PhD chemical engineer. And then the last 4 years, I've been running the student competition in the Burke Center for Entrepreneurship, the Holloman Health Innovation Challenge. And so I'm still wearing that hat a little bit, but we're going to offload that hat. And now I'm taking on this role in the We Reach Biomedical Entrepreneurship Center. That it's a new initiative started here at University of Washington. So I'm the Associate Director of Outreach and Partnerships there. So now we'll start getting into the nitty-gritty. Okay, and you all can answer, whoever's inspired to answer, and pass the questions off. So what does it mean to focus on a customer problem? Actually, Sean, you're a good one to start here.
Yeah, a little bit of a background. We did the NSF I-Courts program, which it was a tough time. I want to say it was a party, but it was really hard.
This is half the time, but it's modeled after the NSF I-Course. So tell them a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the I-Courts program is a 7-week customer discovery program. You're supposed to do 100 interviews, mostly in person during that time. So we have an on-site program. Ours was in San Fran for about 3 or 4 days. And in those times, you're working like 16-hour days. You're going out around San Fran, interviewing people that can help you out addressing your problem. Stakeholders, essentially. And you're just going out there, just like walking into like a fire department and say, hey, what's going on? Can I talk to you? It was really hard at first, just go in there and just like complete strangers. They have no idea who you are and you don't know who they are. And you just got to talk to them and interview them. So you do a lot of that for a couple days and you go back home and go to conferences and use that money to fly around for the 7 weeks to interview people, and you just got to set up all the interviews, which is one step, and then you got to do all the interviews and then analyze all the data you've got. So we actually did 170 interviews, the most out of everyone in our cohort, because we just went all in. So that 7 weeks was just out of control, but it changed everything for us. It really clarified our go-to-market strategy, our business model, some device features. So when it comes to her question, it really comes down to go out there and ask questions without any idea of what your solution is. You have to forget about what your potential solution is, and you have to focus on what the problem is. If you go in, you kind of have an idea what your solution is, like your questions might be a bit biased when you're asking, questions about what the problems are. So you have to go in and just drop your engineering mindset, your entrepreneurship mindset, and just ask them non-leading, non-biased questions about what the problems really are.
Thank you. Chris?
I take a little bit different tack, that basically what happens is you have to have a compelling unmet need that has to be done. And normally what happens is somebody does come up with an idea on what that need would be. And then what's important, if you really want to go forward, is start thinking at that point in time about intellectual property, and if you can, on your idea, at least file a provisional patent, because that protects you, because people aren't going to start signing non-confidentiality agreements when you go out and start doing it. And then list your assumptions on what's going to take to market. And there are really 6 things that you really need to do, and I can talk about those later, but 6 things that you really need to do to build a real company more than just an idea. And so what you do is you list your assumptions, and the stuff that you're doing from the lean startup and so on is a good way of doing that. What do you call it?
Lean canvas.
The lean canvas and so on. And then what you do is you go out and you start testing your assumptions with people. And this is the weakest thing I've seen in people do it. They don't talk to the people that are going to be important to make this thing successful. And so you go out and you do it, and you change your assumptions as time goes on until you get to a point where you really think that you've got this thing in a box that you can really take it to the next step, which is go out and try and raise some money to try and take it into proof of concept. So,
Great. Valerie?
So what does it mean to do to focus in on customer discovery? I think that first you have to define who are your customers, or who you think are your customers, and then, because otherwise, if you don't target appropriately, of course, the questions you ask will be, and the answers you'll get will be meaningless. So identifying who the customers are, who is going to buy your product, and also who are the influencers. And the questions might be different for the influencers. For example, I'm going to give you the example of Vice's products, a football helmet. Who's going to buy the product? Depending on who you're targeting, whether it's the NFL or the college players or the high school players or the little kids, the buyer is different. It can be the parent, it can be the team, it can be the player, and the questions are going to be different accordingly. If it's the youth player, then you're going to ask questions to the little kid, but in the end, it doesn't matter. It's really the parent that matters. But for the teams, it could be the equipment manager, so the person who coaches and help the player to get the equipment. So all these answers need to be taken into consideration. So the first step in customer discovery is understanding who the customer is, who are the influencers, and how you can adapt the questions accordingly. Of course, in a non-biased fashion, so you don't get the answers you want to get. And that first set of questions will be able to confirm that there's actually a real problem that needs to be solved. Then the second set of questions can be a little bit more targeted toward your product, at trying to understand whether your product, as you envision it, is going to solve that problem, and you can validate that by asking a second set of questions, either to the same people on the second stage or a different set of people. That's how I've seen it do, and it works pretty well that way.
So you already answered the second question, which is what is customer discovery and why bother? It's critically important, actually. So what are some tools that we can use to implement customer discovery? Where would you go, or what would you do for your first dip into it? Or maybe some of your teams might have already done some customer discovery and you need some new ideas for how to get the information that you need.
Talk to the expert. So first of all, online there's like a ton of, as you can imagine, a site listing different questions that are generic questions for any type of product on how to study your customer, but identify who you think are your first customers and actually help them to craft the questions for the other ones. And so ask them what's important for you and what type of questions would you ask to another customer in order to sell a product or understand a market in that space. And they're the customers, and they can help you do the customer discovery, actually.
So I'm going to put a couple of you on the spot, maybe Valerie and Sean. Can you do a quick little role play of how you would do a customer discovery interview without leading toward a certain answer? So customer discovery, you really want to come out of sales mode. You're not selling your idea. You're not convincing people. I mean, usually when we're trying to get funding for something, we are selling our ideas. And so you really have to back off and put on what I do is I put on my curiosity hat. Like, what's that person's life really like? What's important in their workflow? What are the big hassles to them? And I may have some ideas about that, but if you can back off and be very open-minded, and Sean, you've referred to this. So anyway, let's say you're it's top of mind.
All right, let's say that you are a physician that might use EpiPens.
I like that.
Yeah. All right, so, hey, how's it going?
How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for this random meeting. So, do you use EpiPens in your workplace?
I do, actually.
What's your experience like?
I really like them, but they're very expensive.
Okay.
Good answer.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult for my patients to afford them, and I don't know what to do when people are not covered by insurance.
Interesting. It's good to hear. So, what do you think a reasonable price range would be for those?
Of what, sorry?
What do you think?
Reasonable price?
Yeah.
It depends on who the customer is, but frankly, 0 would be great for some of them.
Okay. What else other than price is a problem for you?
Usability. It has to be very easy for some of the populations I'm dealing with who don't speak very good English sometimes, or either very easy or very repeatable.
Okay. Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So.
So
So
the
when we
more
first-
you guys can practice.
Yeah, when we first started the iCourse program, before they send you out, they actually have you come on stage with your team members and demonstrate doing non-biased questions, and I was really bad at it. I was really bad. Just like kept leading them on, and they would all stop me. And during the iCourse program, they yell at you. they would yell me up there. So my co-founder Richard did a lot of the talking. But yeah, just practice before and listen to each other.
It's not as simple as that, because I think that you have to come up with a set of questions, but then you have to read them again, envision the type of answers that they could give, and because if you put yourself in this role position, of course you'll see whether your questions are biased and how other people read them, and so it's not like a 10-minute listing of different questions that you think are obvious. It has to be read by different people under different angles.
Yeah, and you can't go in with a template because it's obviously not going to go the same every time. We can go in with a list of questions you want to ask and kind of hit them at random spots, but everyone will be different.
So for people who are shy, maybe technical people who really like working on these product ideas, what kind of advice would you guys give? Chris, do you have advice? You
I
coach
think
a lot of teams.
the method I used was go in and explain the product, but not go and try and sell it. So, and then try and get a reaction from the people in terms of doing it. And
no ice cream questions.
No ice cream.
So that was interesting.
Little sidetrack.
But go in, and once you do that, you can be shy or not shy, but I mean, what you're really doing is you don't have to get necessarily the rapport, you just have to outline the thing and then get the answers. And what you do is you go in and say, like I'm building an EpiPen, but the idea is it's a pen with a reusable thing and so on. And don't go in and try and sell it. Go in and explain the product to somebody, and then get their reaction to the product coming back. And then, as Sean said, there's certain questions you need to have answered before you go forward. You want to make sure if it doesn't come out, then do come out. And I did use a template, but same thing is you have to use it depending on who you're talking to. But if you get in front of people and tell them that you're a poor starving student and want their thing, people are usually pretty generous with their time, and that's what I found. So don't get worried about it. You don't have to be a celebrity to talk to people.
Yeah, you gotta play the student card hard. We hit that first off every single time. But as far as it goes for being shy, when we were doing interviews, my co-founder was a bit shy, but like I said, he was a bit better with the questions. So I would go in there because I was less shy. Would go in and just hit up these strangers and break the ice. So if you're going in with two people, which you always should, so you can have one person kind of take notes and kind of show them the list of questions as well. Have the other person break the ice, the one that's less shy, and then the other one that's more shy can then jump in once the ice has been broken. And once they have more experience with that, then maybe they can be the icebreaker further on.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I went with to the national program 2 different times with 2 different teams. And do we have faculty members still in our group too? I think it's hard for academicians or faculty members. We're so used to talking about our work and telling people what to do, actually. I mean, if you're a physician, you're guiding people on what the care plan's going to be and what the patients need to do to make it all work. And you really have to back off from that kind of a mindset and being out there and doing customer discovery is the great leveler, where anyone can do it. I mean, I've met high school students who can put on that curiosity hat and do great interviews, and people with no technical background who can do good interviews. And it's just very valuable advice, whatever your product is. And one thing that I've done with the 2 teams that I went with is we got thrown out of the building, as they say, at that first day of the ICOR process, and I pushed them to talk to anybody on the street about one of the projects I worked on was biofuel related, and another one was a dental product. But what do people on the street think about that? Are they happy with their current selections? And that started to get people over their shyness. And it actually started to naturally help people develop their 1-minute pitch. And so talking to anybody and everybody, but I also want to add to that you don't want to give away your secret sauce technically. You will meet people like me who are like, well, how does that work? Well, what's behind that? I'm an inventor, so I'm always curious about that. And you have to back off from that and not tell them the secret sauce of how things work. We'll talk about intellectual property in the last of these talks. But customer discovery, you really don't want to get into the how it works. You want to talk about what the problems are in their workflow and what really needs to be addressed. Okay, so what kinds of questions should teams in the biomedical and healthcare space specifically be worried about? We're in a complicated space, biomedical.
Cost.
Cost?
Cost is going to be important.
Cost and regulatory.
Mm-hmm.
How about who's going to pay?
Well, that's cost.
Yeah, a lot
Reimbursement. It's clearly reimbursement.
And we'll talk about these in next week. We'll start talking about regulatory, and then we'll talk about reimbursement in the 3rd session.
And influencers are very important because, again, if the hospital pay, for example, for very expensive medical device, in the end, the hospital purchasers have no say in whether they need to buy that device or not. It's the doctors. So you have to understand what the doctors want or what the nurses want. And so that's the questions need to be adapted depending on who you're asking. And you need to understand who the influencers are, which you understand by asking questions.
The doctors don't have any idea what it costs. You go in and they say, well, it costs too much. And then you say, well, what does it cost now? And they haven't got any idea.
Yeah, yeah.
They're starting to be more cognizant of that, but that certainly has been.
But they're being reminded by the people
accounting
that
department.
are writing the checks. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say you have to just ask who your first target customer is, and that's not easy to answer, but that's going to lead to cost questions, reimbursement questions.
But if say it's a medical device, if you're going to go do a medical device, you have to understand whether it's going to get paid for, because you can get through the FDA, you can get everything done and everything, and then the insurance companies who in the end are going to do it won't pay for it because they haven't got it approved yet. So if you don't have an approved product or a DRG or whatever they call them, you really have to understand that, because reimbursement, getting it approved does not mean it's going to get paid for. And that's becoming a bigger issue now than anything. The FDA is actually a lot easier than getting reimbursement these days. So that's on a new product.
And obviously, besides the cost of the actual product, you need to understand the associated costs. So, for example, you're selling a device that has the potential to reduce the number of second operations or readmissions or length of stay, or so all these questions also need to be asked in order to understand not only how much the customer is willing to pay for, but also if the device is more expensive, but it's saving them in the end a lot of money or a lot of doctor's time or nurse's time, or for the same amount of time they can do 2 operations instead of 1. That's very important to know as well.
I'll hold questions to the end. Yeah, we'll definitely have time for questions. I wanted to move to the other half of this topic, which is competitive analysis. When you have a really new idea, what are some quick ways for you to start getting a hang of what's going on out there in the competitive space?
Talk, get out and, no, I mean, there's nothing more than going in and identifying the key opinion leaders and people who are in the space and go in and talk to them. And I disagree a little bit about the intellectual property, because the problem is that if you go in and you're talking to high level people, you don't want to give the store away, but you can't really talk to them unless you start doing it. So I always advise, as soon as you've got a halfway baked product idea, write a provisional patent. It doesn't cost anything, and it protects you because these people aren't going to sign non-disclosure agreements. So, and that's the best way to get it, is you go out and you talk to people in that area, and they know what else is out there for the most part. And then, and then obviously you do a patent search to find out whether there's anything similar out there also.
Yeah, if you can get a high-level conversation with someone in the space and ask them about the competitive landscape, they might tell you, but they might not.
Well, customers know a lot about this usually because they're buying the products, so they know about all the most important products in the space, and going to conferences, obviously, product conferences, and in which companies are represented is very important, and even Medline, PubMed. PubMed have very good reports and reviews on different types of products or technologies or technique, and I find a lot of competitive information in PubMed in articles, and obviously the USPTO. So if you don't know how to find patent applications or patent landscape, you have to go on the US Patent Trademark Office, and you can find either issued patent or pending patent applications, and you can see who filed for it, who are the inventors, and who are the assignees, universities, companies. And and the issue though with that is that it's not very current, because only publications gets published only 18 months after it was filed. So there's a 19 months period where you don't know what people are doing, and that helps obviously you, and it helps other because you're in stealth mode in that time, and nobody knows what you're doing. But if you look at scientific publication, you can have an idea which direction they're going into, and so.
Yeah, right now you should be looking at conferences that might be applicable to you, just so that you don't miss it. What helped us a lot was we went to an allergy conference, and there was a couple competitors that were there that we didn't know about. And I went up to one and was like, I hadn't heard about you all. And they're like, yeah, we just came out of stealth mode really recently. And they were there with a poster, and it was pretty wild to see. So that's a great way to see it. I mean, all the competitors are there.
And investors.
That's why you keep working on your lean canvas too. It keeps keeps evolving depending on what's happening out there.
Investors are also a very good source of information, and so if you and I don't know how it works everywhere in the world, but in Seattle, people are very open to talk to you. And so if you're really serious about your idea, or you want really to identify good information, and you identify an investor who's investing in that space, either an angel investor, although maybe sometimes less, depending on who they are, less knowledgeable about the field, but definitely the institutional investors, VCs, it is possible that you'll be able to find some time to talk to them, and they know everything there is about competition.
Great. So let's take some questions.
So I just wanted to comment on the cost issue, and just to say that I think it's really challenging actually to figure out what things cost, and doctors are actually actively discouraged from knowing what things cost and from entering into that side of the world, and then when you talk to manufacturers, they can give you sort of a suggested retail price, but it's probably doesn't resemble very well actually what the hospital is contracted. So I think one of the challenges is that hospitals have money-making operations, and they have money-losing operations, and they use money-making operations to subsidize money-losing operations, and they are not transparent about how that process works. And so I have found it extremely difficult, actually, to figure out what things actually cost, and asking very straightforward questions. So just a comment on that conversation that doctors want to know and often can't, and even when you ask the manufacturers, they often don't give you this straight, because it may matter how many procedures do you do. Are you a high volume center? Are you a low volume center? What city are you in? Like, it's just, there's so many variables.
It's like, welcome to the U.S. healthcare system, right? Do you guys have anything to say to that?
But it's not, I mean, the main challenge is most stuff now is being paid by third-party payers. I mean, you know, and so what you
That
really,
means health insurance.
health insurance, right? So, you know, and you guys are talking about new stuff, and you know, not stuff that's been around for a while. So, what you really need to do is figure out, you know, those guys in the end are going to make the decisions on whether they're going to pay for something or they're not going to pay for it. And if they're going to pay for it, then the hospital is likely to adopt it. And if they're not going to pay for it, they're not going to adopt it, no matter how many good reasons you give them on why they should be doing it and all that kind of stuff, because they're not going to subsidize it. So. I mean, that's been my experience, and so reimbursement is really important, and you've got to really understand what's involved in terms of getting reimbursement. The best product in the world is one that is better than something out there that's already got a reimbursement code that's good enough to pay for your product. But the days of coming in with more expensive products than the reimbursement code and hoping people will pay for it are over. So, you know, doing more bells and whistles on something doesn't work anymore. It better be cost effective. And by cost effective, I mean somebody's going to pay for it, and the hospital isn't going to lose money using it. So.
And some of you have processes for connecting patients and physicians more efficiently, and modes of doing processes more efficiently. And so you'll probably need to dig deeper into, will this be time savings, cost savings, prevent readmissions, those types of things. And that is difficult to find exactly what you need out there. And in fact, before you actually get your product accepted into the marketplace, you may have to put into your budget that you'll do some studies to show that your outcomes are better, that there is cost savings in order to get it adopted.
But everybody says that. So they come out, and so what you really need to do is prove it. I mean, it's great, but you know, I'm going to save this and so on. They say, okay, show me the data. And if you don't have the data, I mean, you really need to prove that you're going to cut down on readmissions or something like that. Then you better have data, and you can do that in your clinical trials if you do clinical trials to show it. But you're going to have data. Just saying it doesn't work anymore.
And Valerie, you're in more the consumer space. Do you find that to be the case, that people need evidence in order to make a decision on a safety product like the Visis helmet?
Yeah, and it depends on which level of customers we're targeting, either NFL, college, or high schools. But they need, that's what Visis is based on, is data and technology. It's a very data-driven company, and for the last 3 years, so the way it works in that field is that the NFL comes out with a testing result or ranking that rank all the commercially available helmets according to their performance in lab testing. So with regards to their ability to reduce impact acceleration, and Visis helmets was number 1 for 3 years in a row. And so that's what made the company successful at that time, is that and made customers want to buy the products because we were number 1. However, we were very expensive. So at the NFL and college level, it's not that big of a problem. High school, even though parents really care about performance, they cannot afford that product. So as a result, we adapted our product development pipeline accordingly, which was kind of always the plan from the beginning. But the plan was to go after the high payer customers at first with a high priced product that was number 1 rated, and then develop additional technologies at lower price points for this part of the market. So yes, they do care about data, of course. But also in sports, they care about the looks a lot.
Ah.
And so you would never believe that, even though people know that it's a better technology, they've been wearing that helmet for these other helmets for 20 years, or maybe I'm exaggerating, not 20 years, but like 5 years, and they've been successful with it, and they think they look good with it. And there's the mirror test, and there's superstition, a lot of superstition. So it's something that we didn't plan on.
Yeah, never underestimate people's resistance to change.
Yeah, I tell some people that that's their biggest competitor, is your customer may be motivated to just do nothing because of indecisiveness.
It's always easier to do nothing.
Especially in the
Cheaper.
medical field.
And I think that speaks a lot to the importance of customer discovery and doing it different ways. Because if you ask I'm going to talk about my experience with Vices, of course, but if you went there in the early stages, which we did, and you ask about what they want, whether impact acceleration reduction is important to them, whether they want to have a better, safer technology, of course everybody would say yes. But how do you know what questions to ask to test whether they're superstitious? We didn't know that, So in the end, you kind of have to adapt your strategy along the way. You don't know what you don't know, and so it's a very iterative process. You have to ask as many questions as possible so you can get to a proof of concept, and then test it and ask questions again, and then evolve and test it again and again and again until you get to the right product for the right market.
Okay, another question?
I wanted to circle back to this reimbursement piece. So with FDA approval, there's sort of a single entity that makes decisions about that. With insurance companies, is there anything equivalent? Are you contacting individual insurance companies?
CMA. The center, basically people are going to see what Medicare pays for. And if you have to go through that, and they have very stringent requirements, and it's easier for them to say no to begin with. And then the insurance companies will really follow there. Yeah. You can get individual coverage if you do it, but it's a long haul, and CMA is really the one that you want to go for.
And their major metric is cost savings. So the argument is...
No, not really. Their major metric, who knows? That's the problem. They basically, even if there are cost savings, they basically say no to everything to begin with because they don't want to pay for new procedures. And so, and then the other thing that you have to do is you've got to get docs behind you, and like say if you've got a urological product, you want to get people from the American Urological Association to say this is a needed product and that sort of thing. So what you really need to do is you need data, you need papers, and you need key opinion leaders basically saying this is a needed product. That's what you bring to them, and then hopefully they approve it.
Regulatory experts that help you figure out your regulatory strategy usually are very knowledgeable in reimbursement, and they can put reimbursement strategies together at the same time, and they have to think through it at the same time.
When you do your approval for like an FDA approval.
Yeah, the same people have, that's what I'm saying is that if you go through that process, you don't have to put your CMA paperwork as an entrepreneur together. The same regulatory expert can help you figure it out.
Some.
Yeah,
It is different, and it could be the regulatory path is quite simple. You may not need any studies. You may have a pretty simple device to get the FDA to be happy enough with to say yes, but you may need quite a few studies to say that there's enough justification to change the way practice of medicine is done in that area now. So you need to consider that you may need to budget for studies for actually getting it paid for, whereas you may not need to budget for studies for the regulatory path.
Exactly. Just because you don't need studies for the FDA, you'll probably still need studies to get adoption.
And I also know of startup companies in the medical device space, they give away a number of their devices to leading physicians in that space to be trying their devices. And so that's a way that you have to budget for that, to give away some free devices in order to get opinions and trials back.
Your real cost is the time it takes you to get from the FDA to thing, because it may take you 2 or 3 years, and in the meantime, you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, but you got to burn right.
Starving.
Yeah.
When you do a pre-submission meeting with the FDA, you can check a box and have CMS join the meeting.
Okay.
And FDA's really gotten a lot more proactive and been very, very good to work with, much improved processes in the last 10, especially 5 years. And CMS is now on board with trying to transform some of their processes. So there are lights at the end of the tunnel in these processes. Everyone acknowledges it's a big challenge and a problem. Other questions? So just to let you all know, we have 3 other panels of experts topics coming up, covering some of the issues that we touched on today. But if you can start getting out there and just talking to people that you think are relevant for your space, the types of people who would make decisions on purchase, or the types of patients or users, or who distributors might be, and then everyone you talk to, ask them who else you might talk to in order to learn more about the space. People who are actually working in product spaces have an advantage because they're already deeply involved in that particular market. And a lot of us in the university aren't in that product space. We're on the technology side, dreaming up new ideas that may have a product space out there. So we have to do all this legwork to try to match the two. But you don't want to work 8 years on something that nobody wants. So better that you spend the time now doing this work of customer discovery.
Can I insert something? I mean, one thing is it's not just customers, it's influencers or people like that. And there's more than just your product idea that's involved. And what you really need to do is know what you don't know about starting a business. Because there are a lot of deal killers sitting out there. Like if you never get a patent, you probably will never get reimbursement. Not reimbursement, but you'll never get investors. You have to put together a management team. You have to get people on the outside who are willing to back your product. You have to put together a business plan and all these sort of things. And what you don't want to do is spend a heck of a lot of time and go all the way down and find out you got a deal killer sitting there. So one thing is try and get up front, get people that are knowledgeable in the area that can go in and take a look at your product and give you some feedback and say, you may need to worry about this sooner rather than later, rather than put it to the end. Like reimbursement is one of the things. If you come in and say, I'm going to do this sort of thing, and the person says, I think you're going to have a heck of a lot of trouble getting it through the FDA or regulatory. It's going to be a 10-year clinical trial to prove that it's going to do. You really need to have second thoughts about whether that's the route you want to take. So it's not just customers, it's people that understand the area that you're in and get feedback. I mean, the more people that you can talk to with industry experience and that sort of thing, it'll shortcut a lot of headaches down the line.
Yeah, you gotta de-risk now while it's still easy to pivot.
Yeah. I don't pivot after you raise the money because they get mad at you.
What are the different fields the technologies or the teams are in right now?
Yeah, you guys are in a wide range of different fields. Some are like connection platforms for better doctor-patient connections.
But
for
it's
care
all
management.
healthcare?
Yeah, it's all healthcare.
Okay.
This is focused on biomedical.
Okay.
A lot of device teams from engineering and health and masters in applied bioengineering, and then a few physician entrepreneurs with device ideas. We have Cameron's team with One Biotech, and so yeah, variety.
I was actually wondering if I could ask a slight question on that. When you're working on an enabling technology to do things that are currently impossible, how do you have some key customers in mind, have a provisional patent filed? How would you recommend reaching out to these individuals? Likely at the CSO level, CEO level, it's going to probably be a top-down decision. to integrate the technology as into a stack, right? Because it's not necessarily like you are producing a full cell therapy, but you have a technology that will enable the cell therapy to be scaled, to be more viable. But there are already current technologies in use that aren't necessarily better or worse. How would you recommend going about those kind of conversations?
You build a story. So if the value proposition of your technology is to increase performance or decrease cost or save time, which is cost, then you show what happens before your technology was in the picture, and they use your piece of technology was in the picture, and maybe it's another technology that is replacing yours. What are these outcomes? Is it maybe with your piece of the technology, you can increase by 20%, or you can decrease time by 20%. So you build a story before and after. And that works for investors to convey the story. That also works for customers because you can ask them questions as to whether it would matter. And that works for recruiting people as well to pitch your idea.
So that's good for those of you who have research tools that improve quicker ways of finding good drug candidates, for instance.
A lot of this depends on what you are doing, though, is if you're doing a project where you want to start a company versus you're doing a project where you want somebody else to adopt it. And there are completely different approaches to doing that. I mean, one is that in terms of adoption, what you do is you go find the most knowledgeable person you can find in the organization and explain to them why it makes sense, and then get them to approach the higher ups. But what you need is a champion, and you need to find one.
Can you give more detail about your particular idea or what you're thinking about?
Yeah, it's a small molecule inducer-free gene expression platform. Environmental control. So, ex vivo and in vivo control of nearly any protein.
And so what does that change compared to, or can you explain more about the application?
Yeah, current manufacturing in CAR T cell therapies is probably the biggest hindrance, and it's really coming down to phenotype-specific promoters and induction systems for gene expression. Ours is a sequence-agnostic control system for nearly any organism to really enable allogeneic cell therapies.
Okay, so you increase your patient population.
Increase patient population, drive costs down, potentially usher in a new wave of therapeutics entering the market because you can derive them from stem cell lines.
Mm-hmm.
And then the platform also has a number of other applications as far as vaccine and oncolytic virus development. So we are kind of adopting a dual-headed revenue strategy where we could license in the short term and then develop therapeutics in the long term. There's only been a few companies that I know in biotech that have done that, which is actually was going to bring me to my next question, was whether or not you should kind of do what everybody else is doing as far as the timeline is concerned, or really go off on your own accord and try to make it happen like few others have ever done.
So it's a real company, you're actually doing it?
Yeah, we're founded. I just got back from JP Morgan yesterday.
Oh wow, what's the name of the company?
Exact Biotechnologies.
I have somebody to introduce you to.
There you go.
Universal Sales, have you heard of them?
Yeah, I'm actually having lunch with Claudia and like.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I don't need to do anything then. She's the person to know.
She's a friend. But yeah, we have founded, launched. We are raising a seed round. It's a little tougher than you might imagine. I'm sure actually you can all imagine. It was tougher than I imagined.
Yeah, that's probably an answer to another question. How tough is it?
Right.
It's tough.
Well, that's why they call this thing the Valley of Death.
But you know, I
The
grew up in
first
the Valley of
Valley of
Death,
Death.
so I'm not too scared of it. But yeah, you know, we're getting to the point where we need some type of influx to sustain ourselves. You know, we have a pipeline that is planned. We have a number of grants that we want to apply for. We have a lot of pieces in place. We need to get there. So.
And so did what Claudia did answer part of your question, which is
Yeah, so
because
I've kind of adopted adopted some of Claudia's model, right?
Yeah, and so for everybody else, Claudia is the CEO of Universal Sales that got acquired by Astella, and she started a company, a spin-off actually, that used a technology that is adeno-associated virus inserted into cells in order to take out their self-recognition molecules. So that way you can use this technology for cell therapy. Right now in cell therapy, you either have to give embryonic stem cells, so your own umbilical stem cells, and so you don't reject them, or you have to get anti-reject medicines. And so this technology allows for anybody to receive these cell therapies. It's a little simplified, and so she had the option to either develop it into a sustaining company by herself, or go and develop a molecule and a cell therapy by herself, or go the strategic partnership route and go with company who were doing clinical trials already and who were doing cell therapy, and partner very early with them in order to incorporate her technology early on. And that's what she did, and that's why she got bought by Astella. So that's exactly the question he was asking, and what he's wondering what he needs to do.
And
Yeah.
sometimes it is the customer discovery process too that will help float to the top which direction you should go. If people are very excited about partnering because they already have some things in the pipeline that this might enhance, then that might be your easiest partners. Or if no one's really biting on that, then you might choose to go a different vertical. So, any other questions before we? Okay, you guys. Well, let's thank the panel. Thank you, Chris, John, and Valerie.